to another episode of Race Talk Revolution. I am your host and founder of Race Talk Revolution Incorporated, Reverend Lane Cobb. As you know, my co-founder, Reverend Eugene Holden, is taking some time away. My co-host today is Mr. A.J. Woodson, who is editor-in-chief of Black Westchester Magazine and co-host of People Before Politics Radio. And I'm going to turn it over to AJ to introduce our speaker and talk a little bit about Race Talk Revolution.
Thank you. Our speaker today is Ms. Muriel Tilliinghast of Lucy's Children, a racial justice group committed to engaging communities in conversation to examine the fiction of race to address the fact of racism. I love that. Race Talk Revolution is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as a species, uncover the not so hidden truth that we all want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systematic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radical inclusive love. Even if you do not understand or agree with what's being shared, we ask that you listen with respect, appreciation, and empathy in our commitment that every person be encouraged, heard, and appreciated, because here on Race Talk Revolution, every voice matters.
Thanks, AJ. I love how you're reading that as if you're like hearing that for the first time. like, wow. A little wonder is always good. So our speaker today is Ms. Muriel Tilliinghast. She is an American civil rights activist and former Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Field Secretary, otherwise known as SNCC. Prior to SNCC, she had been a leader in the Nonviolent Action Group, which was focused on racial issues in Washington, D.C., Highway Route number 40, and in Cambridge, Maryland, in conjunction with the work of Gloria Richardson, one of my heroes. In June of 1964, she joined SNCC staff for Freedom Summer, the now famed Mississippi project focused on voter registration. Immediately after graduating from Howard University, Tilliinghast volunteered to engage in the summer project in Mississippi and organized freedom schools to teach African-American history and to discuss civic participation inclusive of voting rights and responsibilities in a democratic society. Ms. Tilliinghast was one of only 3 women to lead projects under this effort. Following her involvement in SNCC and the civil rights movement, she has remained an advocate for human and civil rights. In the 1970s, she became an instructor at the Atlanta University School of Social Work and other colleges and universities, including Teachers College at Columbia University. Her work has included issues of tenant rights and adult and prison education. She worked in education as an administrator and teacher at the Brooklyn House of Detention and Rikers Island in New York City. In 1996, Tilliinghast was selected as the New York Green Party candidate for vice president alongside Ralph Nader. Active at the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, Muriel Tilliinghast heads a program called Lucy's Children. The long-term weekly program delves into the many issues of racism. You can learn more about Lucy's Children at bsec.org/LC. Ms. Tilliinghast, welcome to Race Talk Revolution. We're so pleased to have you. You are more than welcome. It's an honor. Perhaps you could kick off this conversation by telling us a little bit about Lucy's Children and what you provide and to whom.
Lucy's Children actually is an opportunity for us to go in any direction we would like, because it is participant directed, to explore the various aspects of racism. We learned early on from scientific sources that the idea of race is actually a misnomer. Actually, the use and the word race is a lie because there's only one race. It's called the human race, and that is biologically sound. That does not have to do with the fact that I want to be a part of everybody and everybody is a part of me, which is also true. But the point of the matter is that what we look like, our hair texture, all of that is basically environmentally or culturally determined in the 60 some thousand years since our ancestors began to explore this globe. Actually, the human species has been exploring this globe for a little better than 3 million years. We've been everywhere and done everything and look like all of us, but we are all cousins. We have families, or members of a family. And that's one of the reasons why our difficulty is so hard to resolve, because it is an acceptance of a basic biological fact that there's really no difference between us. The only difference is the manifestation of character. We've got thieves in every group. We've got good people in every group. We've got all kinds of things. So it's well distributed in the human family, the good and the bad. So I'm seeking the good. And in the seeking of the good, I'm looking for us to multiply that, because I think some of the people who are engaged in the bad are lost in ignorance, alienation, and a bunch of other kinds of considerations. And if they knew that there were some safe harbors, some places where yes, they could come and they could raise their issues, and they would be respected, and an answer would be given to them. It's not the answer of answers, but it is something that will give you pause, give you an opportunity to critically review what is being said. So that's it. So that's Lucy's Children in a nutshell. So for 3 Fridays of the month, the first 3, and this has been going on now for the last 6.5 years, we explore various things, and we've done, oh my goodness, we've done so many things. I will give you some idea in a minute. We've had guest speakers. We've talked about COVID. We have talked about, let's see, what do you call it? The alt-right. I am pulling up my, I gave a detailed report at some point, which of course my Mac is not going to, oh, here we go. We had a big conference this time last year on how some Indian groups, Native Americans in the 19th century, gave safe harbor to fugitive slaves, which is an area that most people are not aware of, and it gets stepped over historically. That was a great conference. It was called a Conference on 19th Century America, Finns, Fugitives, and Friends. That went over a 3-day period. We've had guest journalists who have come on. We have provided some public statements on various things, abortion, war. I gave a rendition of what had happened to me of 9/11, because a lot of people who are talking about 9/11 were not present in the city. They are coming from outside of the city and how that impacted them, but I was right there. And that's a whole different ballgame, I do believe. And then, we have done work with an NGO that deals with work on behalf of children. I think it's exciting. I mean, we've talked about Algeria, Afghanistan, some issues about Germany, Brazil. So we're only limited by our own limitations. And that's one of the things that I love about Lucy's Children. And I invite your participants today to come and join us and see what we can learn together.
Absolutely. You say that we need to do better in terms of creating our future. What do you mean by that?
You have to have a vision and you have to have a belief. Those 2 things are essential if you're going to make any progress going forward. Where you or this, it would be your present set of circumstances. And I don't care whether you're rich, poor, black, white, whatever. It doesn't matter whether you are literate or illiterate. The beginning of tomorrow begins now. All right. And so I think if anybody actually looks around, you can see that we have some very serious crises at our fingertips. We have a crisis in our governmental system. We have a crisis in our interrelationship. There are significant numbers of people in this country who have decided that they don't like people like me, but they don't even know people like me. They don't know anything about me. And what I know about them, I know is seriously in need of review. When you think that you have to arm yourself against your neighbor, then we have a problem with what we consider who our neighbors are. All right. And so, all of this, and then it's obviously, I live in New York. Every day we're having murder charges, and these are horrible examples of this, just the disregard of human life. Fathers oftentimes, and sometimes mothers, harming their own children. It goes on. It's a sorry story. So the question is, do we continue the sorry story, or do we try to do something about it? And when I was speaking to my guys at Rikers, and I call them like my guys, because they are very ordinary men. They don't look different. They don't act any different. You pass them on the street every day. I said, you have to make a decision that whatever got you here, you will not do again. That's a decision that you make. That's not a decision to tell the parole guy or whatever else. Because if you continue to do whatever got you here today, and I'm assuming that you've done something in error, not the ones who have gotten pulled up in the dragnet, which we know also exists, but for those of you who have been engaged in some sorry, both petty and petty crimes, and then in some major crimes, if you continue to do that, then there is no love to give to you. There is no concern to give to you. And when I say to you, I mean it radiates through your family. When a person goes to prison, the whole family is in prison. The children are stymied by even the best of circumstances. So do we want to continue that, or do we want to try to do better? And that's a decision that you have to make. That's a decision as a parent you have to make. If you don't know how to read and write, but you want your child to know how to read and write, you go find somebody to help you. The public library is the one thing I can say Mr. Andrew Carnegie gave us, was the public library system. You go to the public library, I don't know any librarian ever who has ever turned down somebody who says, I need some help. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's one, so please don't tell me about the one that you know. But the point that I'm trying to make is that help is there. You have to ask. And if you, as the Bible says, ask and the door will be open. Well, okay. And if one door doesn't open, try another. But don't get tired. Okay.
Well, let me ask you this, if I would. Thank you so much for that. So then expanding that to the larger society, right? What actions are the actions that we need to now choose differently, right? In terms of society, you've been doing this for a very long time, working at relationship building, working at changing hearts and minds. You said having people come to reckoning, here's what I did, now I have to choose to do it something differently, otherwise I'll keep going down the same road. So what are you proposing that we should be doing, and what are some of the barriers that you've seen to having people make changes?
Well, I may not be answering you directly, so let me take a sidestep. One of the concerns that I have about where we are now is the lack of energy on the part of some people, where it is essential that they be energized. And our voting mechanism, for example, there should be a 97 to 100% presence at the voting booth, period. Okay? We're talking about taking a half an hour out of your life. In some cases, some people are going to have to go 3 hours because of what the Republicans have done with regard to making voting so much more difficult. But the point of the matter is that is the gateway. That's not the guarantee. That is the door opener of being able to influence the political process. So that's one thing that comes to mind. A second thing that comes to mind to me is organizational experience. I have noticed how short a fuse people have in their interrelationships with each other. And I'm talking about people who say they want to work together, who say they are part of the same sort of what do you call it, that shared the same values, etc., but they don't know how to work together. It's important as young people that you have an opportunity to engage in organizational building and that you understand that organizations take a great deal of tolerance and patience. And yes, you're going to get angry, but you don't get angry to the point where you just walk away and you were a radical on Monday and you're a reactionary by Saturday. That's not going to work, people. Okay. You can't get angry at people because they're people. You have to understand that you have bought into a philosophy or you have not bought into that philosophy. So that's another thing I'm going to suggest, that you have to get organizational experience and you can't have enough. I started my organizational experience at my grandmother's knee. My grandmother was an activist, and because my mother couldn't find a job in Washington, even though she was a certified teacher, my grandmother ended up trying to raise me, which is another story. The point of that I'm trying to make is my grandmother was an activist, and I went to meetings with her all the time. Was I, what do we call it? Was it interesting to me? No. I had my crackers and I had my water, and I was told to sit in the chair and be quiet, just like people used to take their kids to church and tell you, yeah, we're going to be at church all day, and I don't want to hear a peep from you. Okay. You take it in, because you can't be in an environment and not take it in. And it comes with repeated association. That is a primary learning tool. And you will finally learn how to listen, how to govern, how to keep people on track, how to come to an end point, and you want some tangible results. So I got dragged up to civic association meetings and Daughters of the Eastern Star meeting and all kinds of places that my grandmother was associated with. Why? Because my grandmother was involved in anything that had to do with uplifting Black people. And she came into Washington during the period where lynching, for example, was wholesale and widespread in the South. So we had reasons to fear the kind of hostility that this country can actually provide. And Black people have to learn how to be friends with each other. That's another thing I want to put out. We have to learn to give each other a break. Okay. Now we often fuss with quote unquote the other non-white people because of their behavior. But let's look at our behaviors too. Let's begin to understand and appreciate each other at a higher level. And I'm speaking to people who have children in particular. In particular, your child's education is key, not just to getting a better job, and education may or may not yield a better job, but how about a better brain? How about a higher level of intelligence? How about, more, let's say, a more intelligent group of people to be around besides standing on the corner and drinking joy juice or talking stupid stuff? And my family, for example, and this is just one example of many, we weren't allowed to have gossip in our house. You could discuss what was in the newspaper, or you could discuss what you heard on the radio as a point of information. But just to sit around and talk, as my grandfather used to call stupid stuff, that was out. And because we were an activist family, my grandfather was an activist. We was in the Prince Hall Felix Lodge and all of that. And that had that had a wonderful history. Okay. But that's another story. So I came from people who were not used to sitting around wasting time, okay, doing things that didn't have anything to do with helping the race. And that's very specific. Let me see if I can come up with some other things. I think that reading and studying on one's own, you have to work on yourself. I have been evolving for years, for decades, because there's always something I did not know, or something that I could not place, or something I needed to know, actually. Okay, I didn't even know that I needed to know. All right. And so my point is that the learning continues. Now, unfortunately, in this society, there are people who say, oh, Lord, how long is the book? How big is the book? Is the book 1,000 pages? Is the book 200 pages? Is the print big? And I get this from adults. I mean, this is not even children. Okay. And the point of the matter is are those the questions that you should be asking when you are a student of life, a student of our history? We are an amazing people. Black people are an amazing people. We have come through so much heavy stuff, but before we came through the heavy stuff, we were still amazing. You know, we are the progenitors of the world's family, period. There's no argument there. Even though there are people say, well, I don't look like that. I don't look like an African. I don't, uh, relax, okay? You are part of the same family base. I don't care where you are. You could be in the Himalayas. You can be in the mountains of South America. You can be in the cotton fields of Mississippi. Let me just tell you, it's all connected. And the whole issue of race just falls on its face when you cut beneath the skin, when you look beyond the shape of the eyes or the shape of the lips or the texture of the hair. Biologically, we are interchangeable people. And that is the nature of the issue around race. It is a fictitious idea. It was constructed as a means to justify an economic package, which was quote unquote what? How do we hold this world hostage for the things that we want, we need, never mind what it does to those people. So that's another story, but you get the drift. So have I given you enough homework?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the joy of interviewing someone like yourself, you kind of, yeah, I'll have a list of questions, and you've answered several of the questions before I can even ask them. So that's a beautiful thing. One thing I want to talk about though, you know, with the whitewashing of history right now and the lack of um, Black history being taught in our schools, which I think is detrimental to everyone, not just Black people. We know that people of color have a long and noble history that precedes the history of America. Why is that? Why is it important that people know this? Not just us, but everyone know this.
I'm going to take another step back on this question because one of the things that happened, for example, more so now than when I was a child. I can remember when the first television set came into our neighborhood, and we all crowded into somebody's living room and looked at a 7-inch television because we had never seen the likes of this before. Okay. In the days when before television, we were much more participatory. There were baseball games, there were softball games, the neighborhood had a sandlot team. I didn't care what it was volleyball. You could not go into a neighborhood and not see people jumping double dutch or double or single dutch or playing baseball in the street, even if we were knocking out windows. It was it was a socialization that has gone by the wayside because we now depend on gadgets to make the connection people to people. It doesn't work. When you're talking to the computer, when you're talking to the telephone, guess what? That's exactly what you're talking to. Okay. And the medium that you are using allows you distance, which is one of the things that is problematic with regard to person conversation. How many times have you been with people and they said, well, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I'm really glad to have met you. I just didn't have any idea. Well, understand what happens when that gets what's a magnified, and that becomes the principal means of communication. And it's gotten worse. We've got more gadgetry than we've got fingers. The point that I'm trying to make in that regard is that human beings, okay, require a certain, what's that, gravity, Otherwise, we tend to float off into outer space, both psychological and as well as otherwise. So, having said all that, my feeling is that we have to move back towards the intercommunication. And we have to, now, of course, we have problems with COVID, et cetera. And let's not what's the word? Let's not berate the obvious. We have a virus, so we have to be cognizant of certain precautions. But the point of the matter is that the development process has got to continue, and it starts with you. It doesn't start with the other people. A lot of people say, well, can Black people be racist to themselves? Anybody can be racist. The nature of racism is to use an unfair advantage against somebody else with the excuse of environmental, cultural distinction. Okay? So the point of the matter is, can you be bad versus can you be good? Because racism is just a subset, from my standpoint, under bad. Okay, good is kindness, care, respectfulness. Even if I disagree with you, it's okay for us to disagree, but we have to do that in a civil way. And we have to do that in a way that one life does not preclude or claim another life. We can go our separate ways and we can still be friendly, so forth and so on. I mean, how do our children learn? Look at the disgrace we have right now where children are shooting children. I mean, that to me, much more than just the issue of mass murder, which is in it of itself a horror. Okay. We have children taking out on other children, something that probably was generated in childishness, never was addressed, allowed to harbor and fester. And then now we have this extreme animosity, the behavior of a child who hasn't even begun to live, who hasn't even begun to understand that there's a big world out there. And the little snippet of world that they have is so small, it's infinitesimal. Just as a sort of a step aside, when my children graduated from high school, I made them take a year. They didn't ask to take a year. I made them take a year. I sent one to Asia. I sent one to Europe. Why didn't I send them in the same place? That's a whole nother story. That's a parental determination. Okay. But the point of the matter, children have to grow up. They have to be multilingual. You're not going to be multilingual from school. I'm going to tell you, you need saturation. All right. When I sent my daughter to Spain, she was 16. And people said to me, well, she doesn't know any Spanish. I said, well, long about dinner, she'll figure out how to say, where do I go get dinner? And that will be her beginning sentence. Look at that. I said, if you raise an intelligent child, you don't have to worry about that child when that person gets to be at a certain age. Yes, it's a new step. It's a different step, but they take it soundly. They take it soundly. Now, if you've raised an infant and the infant at 16 is still an infant, you got a problem. Listen, when I was growing up, people said to their son, I'm going to send you to the army to make a man out of you. Well, what happened to the first 16 years of parental life? You had 16 years to make a man out of this boy child. Why are you sending him to the army to learn how to kill in order to be a man? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, are we missing some steps here? Okay. Now, life is not easy. I've often said to people, you see, I don't need any prompting. You can see I can just go on forever. The whole normal birthing, I don't know about the cesarean birthing, but the normal vaginal birth is the beginning of the entity learning that life is a struggle. That, in a philosophical sense, not just in a physiological sense, is the beginning of life. The child is struggle. The child has to struggle to get entry into the world. And the child cries because the child is hungry or wet or whatever that. But over time, The child begins to understand that the struggle moves from my personal needs to larger needs. Who am I in the family? The child may be assigned chores or responsibilities because you're not just a child in this family, you're a part of this family. You have work to do. We all have work to do. All of that. So you can see the progression from from inside your small life to a larger life, to a recognition of who you are in the family, your family in regard to the neighborhood, so forth and so on, as you branch out into the world. It is important that our children understand that there is a very large world out here. I don't care who told you how small it is. It is not small. It is very large. And there are people all over the world who will both love you and hate you. Okay. And you're going to have to learn how to negotiate all of that.
Well, may I say that part of what you have pointed to is giving people another way to look at life and their role in the world. I think that a part of youth gun violence, a part of this whole morass that we've gotten ourselves into is that our youth say they don't have hope. They don't feel that there's really any purpose. That the vision is particularly in the United States, the way that we have our culture is very limited, that we do look very small, at things kind of like, here's what you need. You can't go forward without this. If you can't afford that, then you might as well forget it. There's no value. So how do you consider that we might go about changing this narrative? Because like you said, yes, the world is huge and the narrative that we have is very limiting here in the United States, and we're self-destructing. And so what do you propose?
Well, I don't have a single proposal. I have multiple levels of proposal. There's the individual proposal, there's organizational stuff, etc.
Well,
Let
let's
me
look at
just
let's look at the proposal of, here we are, a bunch of people who are interested in being change makers, right? Lucy's Children
okay.
is certainly a change making organization. So
We
let's
try.
say that we come from different places and different backgrounds and different orientations. What would you propose for a group like this, for example?
Okay, well, one of the key things and one of the key responsibilities in organization is consistency. So once people have made was it a promise, a pledge, a commitment to doing certain work, then the first step is understanding what that commitment looks like and being honest with yourself and the organization. I'm here for a little while, I'm here for a long spell, etc. And in that commitment is a determination, what do we want to accomplish? Because every organization is not going to accomplish the same thing, nor is every organization going to be as effective as it can be, but they can interrelate. Let me give you an example. When we were in the Nonviolent Action Group, now we had no money, zip money, and people came from everywhere. We had Jews, we had Muslims, we had Catholics, we had Protestants, we had everybody, and we had people from Howard. When I walked into that meeting at Emmaus House and saw that room full of young people, most of whom were white, but it was definitely under Black leadership, and Carmichael was holding forth in the middle of the room talking about a demonstration that he was going to have the next day. I began to understand these people represented every university that was in Washington, D.C. Okay. And they came with a commitment to support our objectives, which were to work on municipal employment by Black people, period, and to get rid of obvious issues of racism. One of the things we worked on very early was the use of the word Redskins for the Washington baseball team. I mean, that just gives you one example of the kinds of things. So there are lots of issues within an organization that people can take. Everybody's not going to take to heart the same issue, okay? So you learn to perfect your understanding of what the issue is. You have made a prior commitment. You're willing to come together routinely to work on how we resolve what our current status is with regard to this issue to where we want to go. Who are the principal people who are involved? How do we make policy changes? How do we make community changes? Those are two different levels of work but it's their work nonetheless. Okay. And then you go on from there. This is an evolution. This is not, it's not a Broadway play where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is a beginning. The middle just keeps on rolling. And at some point, you'll have many different kinds of ends. You will have handled certain objectives, but other objectives will not be addressed. You keep them going, or you change them, and you keep moving on. A lot of people will not stay for the whole ball game. We learned that in the civil rights movement. Some people came for a photo op. Some people came because they've got 3 months. Some people came for, several years, and some people came for a lifetime and have taken their learning processes, okay, from that experience and applied it to various walks of life: nurses, doctors, environmentalists, poets, filmmakers, so the application is endless. Am I answering you?
Yes, yes, absolutely. You spoke a little bit of this, and I know you talk about the need to build critical mass among right-thinking coalitions. Who are those, and why is that an imperative?
You want to coalesce with people who are going in the same direction with you. The journey is miles long, and you will not see the end of it. You will not live to the end of it, but you will be at the beginning with other people. This is part of how far can we go together, where you can go. The civil rights movement didn't start in the church, but they went to the church as a place to get people who were, quote unquote, right thinking. When I say right thinking, people who wanted good, who understood the difference between good and bad behaviors, both on their part and on the part of other people. So the civil rights people took their message to people in church. Okay. Now, did we ever take the message? I mean, that was before I was a part of it. Did we ever take our message to people who were in saloons and various other places? Well, we tried, but a lot of these places are based on diversion. So you're not going to be able to interfere with all that, okay, that's going on. But like I told my boys at Rikers, well, now I have you in the captive audience, and either you can listen or you can go back to the cell. What's it going to be? And some people, some people got up and left. Everybody's not interested. Everybody's not interested in doing better. Do you understand what I'm saying? But you keep on preaching, you keep on telling the message. And yes, you do sound like a preacher. Well, we all preachers, because we all try to get a message across. And there's nobody who is more gifted in getting the message across than the person who believes, who has the vision, and who is willing to do the work and dedication. That's all I can say. That's it.
Lane, you have.
No, I'm just listening. I'm thinking that we're going to go ahead and if people have questions, we can go ahead and open the floor to that. I love what you said about everybody being a preacher, because we all are. And you saying nobody is better at getting the message across than somebody who believes in it and is willing to talk about it and to present it. I think that in order to get a critical mass, we all have to start talking very loudly. What you're talking about is organizing, basically is what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And recognizing that that there are forces, very real forces, that are committed to disorganizing. And that what we need to do is keep coming together and keep coming together and keep coming together. We have some very powerful organizers in this group, in the Race Talk family right now, that I'm very pleased, to have as a contact, as a connection. I'm very interested in hearing a little bit about, this is a change in subject, but how did you end up being a vice presidential candidate with Ralph Nader on the Green Party? How did that happen?
That is a side trip, isn't it? Well, I was very active with some people here who were working on trying to get a third party onto the what do you call it, the electoral, into the electoral process. You have to have 5% of the vote. At least at that point, you had to have 5% of the vote. And the Green Party was very vigorous in that regard. And then at a certain point, the question came up about, well, who's going to run? Who's going to be the front runner? And Ralph Nader, who's an interesting personality, was obviously the lead. And in various states, Ralph made some decision about who he wanted to be associated with. Now, that's a whole other ball game. And please, let's not go down that street. In New York State, I was his vice presidential nominee, and I did the stumping. He never came to New York. I did the stumping through the state. Okay, and I managed to keep us on the roll. Okay, keep us on the electoral chart so that we could have further candidacies. And that has to be done every time. Basically, it's really quite something, that process. And I hope that's the short answer. I hope that short answer gives you enough to be satisfactory.
It's just fine. I just put something in the chat, folks, inviting you to please raise your hand if you'd like to join this conversation. You can go to the bottom of your screen and hit the reactions button, and there's a raise hand icon. Also, you can go to the participants section and find your name and raise your hand that way. We'd be very happy for you to talk about your organizing. What are you doing? What questions you have for Ms. Tilliinghast. She is, as you heard, a career organizer, lots of wisdom to share. If you do have a question and want to join the conversation and you're off camera, we do invite you to come on camera to ask your question.
We actually have, okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Might I just make a small point here? One of our parishioners is Haitian. And she had been actually absent. I mean, I didn't know her very well, but somebody else knew her well and has been for years saying to me, we need to do something, we need to do something. What is it that we needed to do? This woman had gone back to her village in Haiti, particularly after that terrible earthquake that happened was that 2010, something like that. And her town is called Leogone in Haiti. She feeds 260 some odd kids every day. She never asked for help, but this is part of what I mean. When you see something, do something. Don't just sit there and wring your hands. So I got the wind of this, and I said, we ought to do something. And so we were able to raise not a lot of money. It wasn't $10,000. I'm working on that for the next go round. But we raised over $6,000 to put in her hands, okay, to help her do both a school and agricultural project, because the school goes on every day, but some of these children only have one meal a day. Now, some people are going to call up and say, well, we have that problem in the United States, and you're absolutely right. There is no argument here. But this is one of our people and our.
I think we lost the connection.
Yeah, Muriel.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought this call was blocked, but it wasn't. Excuse me.
Okay, that's
so
all
the
right.
point. All right. So the point that I'm trying to make is, you don't necessarily wait for somebody to come to you and tell you what the problem is. You see the problem. You've got intelligence. What do you want to do? You want to work with teenage boys? You grab one of these boys in playing basketball and say, listen to me. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you and your boys, Was they the kind of kids that you want to influence? Okay. And you start talking to them. One of the things that we tried to do in the 60s, we had a man to boys conversation going on, because a lot of these boys don't have men that they can actually look up to and ask whatever the male oriented questions are. The point of the matter is, are you there? Are you ready to also serve mankind? This is without money. There's no money here. Okay. Are you willing to serve them at all hours of the day and night? Because need knows no hour. It knows no day. Okay. What are you prepared to do? And whatever it is that you are prepared to do, be clear about it and stick to it. I finished.
Absolutely. We had a comment from the audience while you were talking earlier, from a Nancy Tilly. She said, words that I needed to hear. I am not always so kind/good to others who are identified as wrong/bad by me. And then she said, in defense of the gadgetry, it does allow me in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to meet and hear these important words, though. That
I
was her
used to go to
comment.
Gettysburg. I was in the Luther League. We used to have a meeting in Gettysburg every summer. I was part of the Luther League was huge and white, okay? And there would be like 500 or 600 white kids and 3 Black people. I was one of the 3. I know Gettysburg, Pennsylvania very well, and I understand that level of isolation, and I am so glad that the gadgetry will allow you to make the contact. And as long as you understand that it's for the contact, it's not your friend, there's a difference. It's like a verbal book. It's like the audio books, okay? Then you're doing fine, and glad to have you, and keep on listening.
Again, we'd like to open this up to the audience. If you have a question, please put your hand up and ask your question for our guest. We do have a question from Leah Nelson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Muriel. I read your bio and I was incredibly impressed, and just listening to you is amazing, and all the history you embody going through the civil rights movement. And I just commend you for your work and how hard it must have been. And I am just recently, I guess, since the George Floyd incident, I have since started trying to become an organizer. And I was recently on a panel talking about careers to Ossining youth. And I was asked why what I always felt in my job as a stagehand, that I wasn't doing anything important enough, that I was making money for rich people, and that I always wanted to be doing something that I felt was important to society. And since retiring, I've joined the Poor People's Campaign, and I'm also campaigning for progressive candidates for the election. And my question to you, so in this career thing, this another speaker who was talking about careers, a Black woman, said, I said I was working for social justice now. And she said that she's been working for social justice her whole life. And it's just since become like a trendy catchphrase, the word social justice. She just thinks of it as community work. And as a white person, I didn't realize the need for what I'm doing now in organizing. And I was just wondering what you thought of the Democratic Socialists and the Progressives, since you were in the Green Party.
I was in the Green Party. I'm not in the Green Party at this point. I'm a registered Democrat because I wanted to make sure that I could try to influence the primary system as much as possible. But let me try to answer your question. As I said to you, everybody is not going to be on the same road. We're not going to end up in the same place, but we can go in the same direction. Okay, and we can be mutually supportive of each other as far as we go. I don't understand particularly the question. If you're saying that you're wondering if you are fulfilling yourself adequately in the issue of social justice versus a woman who's been doing it all her life, well, okay, and moving right along, that's just a reality. That's just a reality check, me too. But let me just say this, civil rights organizing was not my first organizing. As I told you, I went with my grandmother. But at the other point that I want to make, when I was 16, I had the opportunity to go to what was then called British Guyana. Now, British Guiana was just a place on the map. It didn't mean anything to me in particular. But what was particular was the decolonization process that was going on. That while it was not in the American papers, it was all over the Guyanese newspapers because the British government did not really want to leave. And there was a lot of propagandistic journalism that was going on. And I got a chance to look at this and see this firsthand. I mean, I got a chance to see one government going and another one trying to come into existence. And I was 16. I didn't have any preconceived notions of communism or socialism or democracy. I mean, I thought I was raised in a democracy. We all have that, pledge allegiance and all that stuff that we went through. But the point that I am trying to make, I got a chance to begin to see the gaps in philosophies. And I don't expect a philosophy to answer all my questions. I expect me to answer all my questions, but I don't expect the philosophy. And I began then to know that there's something between what I'm being told and some reality. And so I started putting my face in a book. One of the things that I have to say, and notice I didn't say social media, I said a book. One of the things that I was very grateful for my experience in the civil rights movement was the reading that went on. Everybody was reading all the time. It was the most intelligent gathering of people that I've ever seen, both before and since. I've been trying to correlate the group over here at BSEC, at the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, to move to that level, that we want to know enough to make the personal sacrifice of time and attention to know more about what I need to know. You as a young person, and when I say young, I'm talking about organizationally young, coming to work with people who are different from you, you may have the need for the introduction both on class. You may not recognize that the United States has an extraordinary class system. It's not discussed, but it's very real. It's very well, and I can tell you about some experiences that I had in Appalachia that are quite cutting, okay, and which gave me an exposure. So what I try to do is talk to people about what I have seen, and what I know, as opposed to what somebody else told me. Because when people start telling the story gets embellished. Somehow people drop things, they add things, they make emphasis where I wouldn't make emphasis, so forth and so on. But we have a poor problem in this country. It has been here, okay? And it keeps getting ignored. We have a problem with not being able to generate sufficient jobs for people at certain educational levels to be employed. So what do we expect them to do? Everybody's got to eat. Everybody needs some shelter. Are you expecting them to stand on the corner with a cup? Or are you going to make a way for that to happen? Does that look like socialism to you? No, it looks like planning. That's what it looks like to me. Because when corporations decide that they want to go after an objective, do they just go after the objective, or do they pull their people around a room and say, listen here, there's something I want to have done. How can we go about doing it? It's called planning. So, we have a lot of, we're subject to the things that we admire the most. We love television. We love the sensationalism of television. It's wonderful. And it's also short. And then you can go get something to eat from the refrigerator and come back and you haven't missed the place. Okay. All of that is called conditioning. It's big. It's very, very big. I used to tell my students, if you want to be a revolutionary, cut the TV off. Okay, just cut it off. Don't make excuses. Okay, yes, I mean, and I love people like Edward R. Murrow and some other people, but we passed those days by and large. We have passed the days of the investigative journalism, of the investigative journalists on large scale television. You can find some investigative journalism in certain pockets, like in YouTube, etc. But then you got to be careful that they are telling you the truth, as opposed to just giving you an opinion. So how do you counterweight that? You counterweight that by your friendly librarian, your friendly neighborhood library. The more you read, the more you uncover, the more you discover what's not true versus what is true, or what may be true and what definitely is not true. Okay. It took me a while. I was a child. We had stories that talked about how happy Black people were in slavery. I was raised with that notion. Okay. I mean, my parents were intelligent, they were college educated, but that was the propaganda machinery putting that out. You know, that is the period of Gone with the Wind. I didn't have any understanding of what was real versus what was not real, because I was taking the information from an authority figure, and I made an assumption that the authority figure was telling me the truth. Aha. Learning will take you away from just blind obedience. Blind obedience, and there are some families and there are some cultures, many of them are European. Germans are outstanding in this regard, where authority is 1, 2, 3. Even today, 1, 2, 3. You got to break away from it, because you
Abs-
know something. While you may love your parents, they may be wonderful guides. They also are just people,
Absolutely. I want
and
to
they have their limitations too.
oh, sorry to
Am I going
interrupt.
on too long?
Now, I just want to get some of the other questions in. We have so many people
No,
here. So we
no
have
problem. I was just trying to give her a full answer.
Thank you.
Absolutely,
All
absolutely.
right, no problem.
Kyle Robinson is next. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me here. Thanks for the information. That's been great. I really appreciated you. Well, yeah, not talking about race without talking about the prison system, because it's very hard to have an honest talk about either conversation without mentioning the other dimension. I'm a relatively new organizer myself. You can find out what I do at amplifiedsilence.org. That's one of the organizations that I'm a part of, but I created it to make sure that the people who I interact with in prison, which is growing to a remarkably high number, I get a chance to get their voices heard. So I just got that website up today, but if you go on the homepage and click, you can actually hear directly from people who are suffering the consequences of over-incarceration. These are people who have been locked up for decades and who went when they were children. And that's kind of how I got drawn into it. I was charged as an adult and went to prison at 16, and it really accelerated and stunted growth in some ways. So I guess what I'm asking you is, as I'm trying to get active and build momentum in this wave of activism that I've taken up recently, how do I counteract the lack of awareness or attention? I would imagine that most people in here know someone who's in prison or who has been, but what I'm finding out in general is that's just not the case in most spaces that I deal with, even spaces that are race related. Any ideas on how I can attract attention to this critical issue that really can't be disentangled from racism? Thanks for making space for me.
Well, that's a very complex question, and I am not sure that I'm going to be able to do anything except throw a couple of darts in that general direction. I will say this to you. It is hard to get people to invest in themselves. They want somebody else to invest in them because they don't have a sense of personal value. What I do, and I don't know if this is a good way for you or not, but I read and I stay conversational, and I am willing to take on anybody in terms of conversation. And I want people to understand that I am willing to listen to whatever questions they have or whatever thoughts they have, and let's move on. I may never see them again. Everybody's not going to be with you for the short time. I mean, for the long time. They'll be with you for the short time. People who are in the prison system are caught up in a vice that is vicious, and there is no other way to put it. And it gets accelerated by some of the vicious personalities, both on both sides of the bars, okay, who happen to be in the prison system. And I have met some people on both sides of the bar, so I know what I'm talking about. What I want to say to you is that I would spend some time working with people who look like they think that they don't mind going to prison, but who need to have another thought coming. Okay. When I was earlier on, we used to have the Scared Straight program. I saw it in Jersey, where young wannabes, bad folks would be gathered up. Don't ask me about the gathering mechanism. And through the warden's approval would be meeting with plenty of CEOs in the room, okay, to talk about life in prison. You really want to come here? You are, you know what, and I can't even repeat those words here because we're supposed to be halfway civil and civilized in our conversation. But they would tell these boys, and primarily boys, and no uncertain terms, this is something you do not want. I don't care who taught you, who told you, no, no, no. And they told them the down and dirty, some of those things would pin your ears back, okay? You have to figure out what group of people you want to work with, where you have the greatest traction, because everybody is not going to, what's the word? They're not going to be attracted to change, because change means that they have to change themselves. Okay. Some people are perfectly happy doing whatever they're doing, shooting dope, playing basketball 13 hours a day, and then sleeping for the rest of the time. I mean, I don't know what people do, but it's called living a purposeless life. And you're trying to get people to live a purposeful life. What are you here for? Are you here just because of random protoplasm, a sperm found an egg in somebody's womb and you were born and here you are and you're breathing air and you're not doing anything, you're not helping? In fact, in many cases, you are hurting. Come
So you're
on,
saying
you're more
read first.
valuable than that.
You're saying read first and get the language, and so that I can put words
All of
together.
this is simultaneous. Kyle, all of this is simultaneous. You're talking to people, you're reading at the same time, you're interchanging with people, you're working on ideas. You come up with small projects, something that's easy to do or easier to do, okay? Because part of the feeder route to prison doesn't have to do with the prison itself. It has to do with the circumstances that got those people there in the first place. It came with their association. It came with their judgment. It came with being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, I met guys who were going up for 20 years to life who were not capable of doing the crime that they were charged with. And I'm not a DA, but I saw that myself. What can we do about it? Well, you know, you can't stand in front of a moving train. That's suicidal. So what you try to do is to keep people from getting on the train, okay? And once they get off the train, they have to come to a maturity. I mean, I used to hear guys, you know, talking to each other, and they said, well, how long are you in for, man? I'm in here for 20 years of life. And they, you know, and the word was always, let your mind be free, because they got your body. There's no way you can even consider otherwise making it and being sane on the other end of this deal. You're getting ready to go through a gauntlet, and that's just the reality. So work with young people before they get to prison, because working in prison is hard, and you don't have any friends in prison. The CEO is not your friend. The guys you try to help, they're not your friends either. You know, nobody's your friend. You know, and when I say friend, I mean friendly, trustworthy, respectful, kind, considerate, you know. Now, does that mean that you can't ever eventually find somebody in prison? Trust me, if you work with some of the guys who look like they're on the way to prison and they've learned to trust you, you will work your way into prison, because everybody got somebody upstate. Everybody got somebody somewhere. And that's the feeder route that you need, as opposed to you walking through the door and say, hey, I'm a good guy. You want to listen to what I'm going to say? You say, you know what, man? You know what they say, right? Okay. So I'm just telling you, it's a slow process, and you have to be patient with the process.
Patience, yeah, makes a difference.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Muriel. Thank you, Kyle, for your question and for your organizing. Because I've spoken with you, I know where your heart is. So thank you so much for being here and asking that question. AJ, we got a question in the chat from Eddie, and then we have Adine with her hand up.
Right. So Edie Fry said, dear Miss Tilliinghast, I love your wisdom. Can you help me with this? Many of my beloved continue to be impervious to the damaging effects of their actions. What should I do? What should I be doing to help them start taking responsibility for their actions?
It's a question, but it's so general. I don't know if I can really grasp it. Um, you want to take a moment and see whether you can get a more refined question out of that.
Eddie, do you want to unmute?
Hi. I'm sorry if it's too broad, but it's something that's been driving me for a long, long time. That I was the beneficiary of, having my shoulders shaken and started to see the world a little differently than the way I was brought up to understand the world to be. And got increasingly frustrated, disappointed, angry about injustice that surrounds us. Other people who I care very about, both care very much about, observe me doing this, and in many respects, there's some appreciation, but I haven't been successful in a large way of having them take it inside and have their own realization that their continuing life as it is doing harm to others, that they need to take responsibility for their actions. So anything, these are people I've been around for a long time. Some are new people, but mostly I'm talking about people I've known in some cases all my life, and other people much of my adult life. And I live my life pretty clearly. I'm not hiding who I am and what I believe in. And yet, for years and years, I mean, in some cases, there's some people on this call that know I've been doing this in one location of my church, our church, for about 20 years. And there's a groundswell now, but people have been saying that's just Eddie. Rather than me being successful at drawing the attention, it's not about Eddie. It's about helping people to own what they have created and sustained. White people, predominantly.
Eddie, oh,
Well,
okay, go ahead, Muriel.
I'm going to try to take a plunge into this big vat called a question, because it's got a lot of layers to it. And I'm not sure if you're going to get a satisfactory answer. I'm going to say this to you. People that you are in close association with at one stage of your life will not necessarily transfer into another stage of your life. That's just the reality. Marriages are broken up. All kinds of differences manifest themselves when you commit yourself to something beyond what was your group's shared value system at one point. This happened in SNCC, for example, and I'll just be very specific, among whites who joined us. Many of them lost their family. I mean, they just lost them. People told them, don't come back. I don't want to see you anymore. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. We had a couple of people who were Hasidic Jews, who not only left the Hasidic community, but all their other, accompanying kinds of things, and their families said shiver for them, as they were dead to them. So the commitment is not something light. Now, when I joined the civil rights movement, I had had some exposure both to American racism in the hill country of Maryland. I told you a little bit about Guyana Hot Minute, so that just added layers of my understanding. And then I started reading some biographies of people who had struggled before me, because this is an old battle. This is not a new battle, and this is not necessarily an American battle. This is a human battle, okay? And there is a certain level of isolation that's going to happen to you as an organizer, as well as to those people who, and people do gang up. I mean, it's really kind of amazing how we don't ever get out of nursery school. But, they'll say, oh, well, there's something going on with John. I don't know what to say about, he's acting very different, as opposed to asking John, what is going on with you? What is talk to us? Because if it's something about a philosophical change, not, a personal change, not a mental issue, none of that kind of thing. But, I'm making a decision about how I want to live the rest of my life. I'm not prepared to do this all the time. I don't want to meet in an all-white bar and talk about Black people and how wonderful white people are for 5 hours on, 16 beers. I don't want to do that. Okay. I want to do something else. Well, you want to go and work with those people? Well, you know something? You don't have to announce everything. Okay. You just go ahead and do it. We spend a lot of time trying to explain our way to people. You know, in the first 5 minutes of a conversation, if this is going somewhere or not going somewhere. If it's not going somewhere, you know how my mother used to say, zip your lips, because you're wasting your time. And all you're doing is giving them additional fuel. You go and live the kind of life that you think exemplifies the values that you espouse, that you believe in. You know, that doesn't have anything with living it down and dirty. That really does lift you up. I tell you, I used to get so spirited when I saw people demonstrating. I mean, it didn't matter if they were minors demonstrating or whoever was demonstrating, who were trying to assert themselves, wanted to get some recognition for the wrongs done to them and giving policymakers an opportunity to make the change. My heart used to palpitate. I loved it. I loved it. You know, one of the things I try to tell people that when we were in that, okay, so we were interested in Black people's issue. But in the corner across the room were people who had come from Appalachia who were working on Black lung disease. A lot of Black people don't know anything about Black lung disease. Well, they came, they asked if they could have some space, and yes, they could squat, because that's what movement work does. It makes room for people who are doing movement work, other pieces of the movement work, okay? You know,
Absolutely.
out of the civil rights movement came the issue of people with disabilities. People think, well, the thing of disabilities just must, well, no, it did not. No, it did not. You know, the whole issue of women, that didn't come out of just out of blue. And I don't care what magazine you read it out of. You know, part of the impact of the gender-based relationship that we had in the organization, and people were really, I mean, these are some brilliant people in SNCC. I mean, you know, this was no light lunch crew, okay? Came the issue of roles of women. And many of those women came out and were part of the women's movement. Were they in magazines and all that kind of stuff? No, I'm not in a magazine either. But you can tell from my conversation, I was there. Okay, this is an Edward R. Murrow. You were there. You know?
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
there you go. I'm trying to give you the best answer I can. Okay.
We have another question from, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Adine Usher. Did I say your name right? Did I say it correctly?
Adine.
Yes.
It's Adine. It's a soft.
Adine.
That's okay. I answer to all sorts of twisted ways of saying my name. That's all right. Muriel, you've given us so much today that it's really hard to form an answer here, but I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. As a senior member of two marginalized groups, African American and female, I see great similarities here in what needs to be done. And you spoke earlier about the need for personal accountability. And I think that is really important. We have to decide what out there in the world we're going to emulate and what out there we are going to reject.
Right.
And as African Americans who were thrown into this country against our will and despised for being here after we were used, we frequently have made serious mistakes as to what we emulate from the larger society. So
absolutely,
women running around with $1,000 handbags when they need to be putting that money, when they need to be putting that money into community resources, we as African Americans have a lot to work on when it comes to that. Racism will always be there, but we keep ourselves weak and vulnerable by making some very bad choices.
decision making, it's key, you know, and part of just being able to make a decision
Right.
is to know more than you know.
Right.
And if you don't have an understanding that knowledge is an ongoing gate, it's a gate that keeps opening, the road gets longer and longer, because the more you know, the more you need to know.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And you're talking about people who come out, you talk about that Hollywood thing. We used to talk about going Hollywood, you know, everybody's trying to emulate, you know, the wealthy, they think that's really great. It's silly. Of course it's silly, you know, but they don't know that it's silly because they've been fed. This is like mother's milk. you
Yeah.
know, make something of yourself, all that kind of foolishness. Where going to school and getting an education and educating yourself, because school is only one level of education.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you what you need to know for a certain set of circumstances, but what you need to know for yourself, you
Yeah.
have to explore you.
And we also have too many women who have internalized misogyny, too many women who have been taught to uphold patriarchal structures.
We got a lot of problems, if that's what you try to say.
Yeah,
We got a lot of problems on a lot of levels.
a lot of levels. But I like your emphasis on personal accountability and being educated enough to make educated decisions and reject that which will make you weaker.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're right on the case.
Thank you
Excellent.
very much for your question. We had a comment on Facebook, Reverend Margaret Coleman. She just wanted to say this was a very insightful conversation. And I've heard you talk a lot about reading, and I'll talk a lot about education. So it's a two-part question, real briefly. What's the last book you read? And do you have a suggestive reading books that our audience should read, that you feel like our audience should read?
Okay, I'm an eclectic reader. I belong to something called Book Up, where you can get books on the cheap for $1.99 for my Kindle. I know, Amazon, let's not even go there. The point that I'm trying to make, I read about 3 books at a time because for different things. I'm reading a book, and one thing, I try to keep up with World War II because that's a fascinating a fascinating war and a jumping off point for some of the things that we're dealing with right now, this very day, this very minute. And the book I'm reading in that regard is called, what is it? The Dressmakers of Auschwitz. Okay. I'm reading another book because I love Michna. I'm reading that simultaneously. That's on Texas. Why am I reading about Texas? Because people need to understand Texas is a very different kind of state. I don't care what state you're in now. Read about Texas. And Michna, while he is a fiction writer, writes so close to the edge of true historical fact. Now, names may change, locations may change, but you get the gist, okay? You need to know this country a whole lot better than your neighborhood, your town, and your state. We got a lot of different cultural groupings and thinkings and regionalizations that we have not come to terms with yet. And I don't get me to start talking about the close of the Civil War, because the South was never taught the lesson. And they have been, in fact, turned the tables, and they are now teaching us the lesson. When I say teaching us the lesson, we are still struggling with stuff that should have been closed in the Civil War. The war was won and it was distinctive, and the traitorous acts were never really called to the fore. So we got these people, it's like a festering wound. You know, every so often they decide, well, let's do something with the Black people. What makes you think that you got any right to have that conversation? Seriously, okay? And then you've got people who moved into the Southwest who are carrying the same foolishness. Don't get me started about this country and the foolishness that people perpetuate with the falsity that it's information. There's nothing informational about this stuff. So what is the other book I'm reading? I'm reading another book, and I don't know, but I read journals. I read magazines that have good gossip, like Vanity Fair. They stand behind their information. A lot of times I can glean some information about how those people think and so forth and so on. I go to YouTube. I mean, I'm in it all the time. I don't have time. When I lost my friends from college, when I went to the civil rights movement, there were people who said to me, or stopped saying to me, that they wanted to be involved. I developed a whole nother set of friends who had nothing to do with prior friends. Was it painful for me? Well, I was so involved in the movement, I didn't even really notice that they had disappeared. I mean, because I'm going to demonstrations and we're planning, and I'm going to school and I'm working at the telephone company. I don't have time to worry about what it is you over here moping about or whatever it is you're doing. We are no longer on the same street. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't dislike you, but I have moved on. Okay,
Absolutely.
That's just the reality. And it's kind of unfortunate. But the point that I'm trying to say is just keep Once you have decided the road that you are going to be, you stay on that road. Sometimes you're on a donkey. Sometimes you walking. Sometimes you crawling. You know. But I will tell you that I'm going to give you a story. I was coming out of a very poor house one day. This is in Washington, D.C. I was doing some work with my teacher, John Henry Saggers. And I was going to this girl. I opened the door. It was a cold day. Do you hear me? It reminded me of them huts that people used to live in Mississippi. I mean, it's as cold inside as it is outside. The only reason why you standing inside is to keep the rain off of you sometimes. And this girl was standing in the middle of the room with a newborn baby. And she looked to be about 18, not much older than me, maybe the same age. And I knocked on the door to ask permission to come in, and she said to me, "You might as well come on in." This girl had been cohorting and cavorting with a young man who had decided he was heading for the highway in a general direction that was opposite to where she was standing. You know what I mean? Okay. And there she was with this baby with no idea of what she was going to do next. I came out of there at some point, and a car passed me, and the guy said, she gave me this thing. And I went over to the car because I didn't have a fear factor with folks who were doing all kinds of things. The man handed me a whole bunch of money in a brown paper bag. I never knew this guy before, never saw him before, I had no contact with him whatsoever. This is just an example. I'm just trying to tell you how you inadvertently you get into stuff even when you didn't expect to get into it. He handed me the money, and his boy sitting next to him by the shotgun said, "You doing more for my people than I am. Take this money, do something with it." I never asked him where he got the money from. Nothing.
That's incredible. That is incredible. I'm going to pass the mic over to Lane Cobbs. She can wrap up the end of the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for this information. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your comments. When you go on to the page for the website for Lucy's Children, you will see that Muriel actively posts articles. Your blog is amazing. So you really do go into some of these issues that you're talking about, helping us to interpret history and relate it to where we are now, inspiring us with true information about African-American history, and kind of talking about lessons that we should all be applying to the way we're thinking now in our organizing, and also to transform our individual lives, to do our own individual healing work, which you also talked about being so important. So we really want to thank you today for being here. Thank you so much. I think you've given us what we need in terms of how you want us to get involved, but is there, do you have like 2 sentences? Like, is there something that you want us to specifically do that you think will move us all forward that you haven't said yet? And then we'll talk about next week.
No, I don't think I could do that, but I will tell you that I would like to thank you for this opportunity to talk to your audience. And if people would like to have further conversations with me, then they can do that through the BSEC blog and the website, and we'll go forward from there. Thank you so much.
So again, thank you. bsec.org/LC for Lucy's Children, Brooklyn Society of Ethical Culture.org. bsec.org/LC. You, my dear, are a gift, and we are so grateful to have you today. Please come back with us, everybody. Next week, we are going to be speaking with Dr. Shannon D. Williams. She is the author of Subversive Habits, Black Catholic Nuns in the Long African American Freedom Struggle. She's going to talk with us about the stories and freedom struggles of Black Catholic nuns and the relationship between the Catholic Church, the Black community, and the African American fight for racial justice, human dignity, and peace. My co-host next week is going to be Catholic theologian and social ethicist, Mr. Alex McCulloch. Thank you also today to my co-host, Mr. AJ Woodson. You can follow AJ at blackwestchester.com and on Facebook at Mr. AJ Woodson. And AJ, you're still taking pre-orders for your book. correct? Yes, Black Westchester, the origin story. And they can get information on Facebook and also on the website about that too, right?
Yes, just go to my website. Follow me anywhere on social media at Mr. AJ Woodson and get the information, or email me at mrajwoodson@gmail.com, and I will give you all the information. Thank you.
All righty. I can't wait to read it. I'm waiting for my copy to come in the mail. As always, we invite you to connect with people who don't look or live like you for meaningful dialogue about race. Remember, we're all in this together, and it's going to take all of us to move this dial, particularly since, I don't know, sometimes it feels like we're going backwards to me. I don't know about you. So we all need to be in this committed space of action. A committed space of action, not just talking, but of action. If you are on our mailing list, please make sure to check out the learning and development resources we send out every week to help you expand your knowledge and give you every access to anti-racism activism that contributes to a world that works for everyone. Highly recommend that you look into, if you haven't done so already, please get into an Undoing Racism workshop. So look up People's Institute for Survival at Beyond, psab.org. You can also find learning resources on the Anti-Racist Alliance workshop. And if you just look up Undoing Racism or Rethinking Racism, that will come up. You want to expand your knowledge. As Muriel said, you want to learn more. Don't stop. Don't think you already know how much you need to know, because believe me, the people who do not want us to grow are learning and continuing to develop their resources, and we need to do the same so we can all come together on the same page so that we can understand what race and racism is in this country, so that we can take a stand against it. If you like our programs and would like to support us, you can make a tax-deductible donation by going to racetalkrevolution.com. If you have speakers or topics you would like us to cover, please send me an email at info@racetalkrevolution.com. AJ, closing words from you, please.
My closing words are in support of what you do. And as someone who has my own forum and platform, this is often a labor of love. If you really like Race Talk Revolution, send a donation, keep this going. Send something to keep this going. Sometimes we have to support our people with our wallets and not just our words. You know, it takes work, it takes money to do this work. So I just want to say that for you, probably more than what you will say. This is a program that needs to be supported. So everybody who likes this, send a little something. That's it.
Thank you to our donors. We love you to death. Ms. Tilliinghast, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Please don't be a stranger. And folks, please do go to that website. And you do meet live in Brooklyn, right? On Fridays, Ms. Tilliinghast?
We are meeting on Zoom. And
You
so
are
if they
meeting on Zoom.
yes. So if they go to the website, they will see contact information for us.
Very great. Oh, that's even better. Okay, so we can tune in even if we don't live in New York.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, bsec.org/LC, Lucy's Children, Muriel Tilliinghast. Thank you so much, my sister, for your wisdom and your commitment.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you for having me.
All right,
Absolutely.
folks. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. And thanks you for the new folks. Come back.